there is no one who out there who will not agree that we are not in a housing crisis, and we have been for at least some time now. And I've always said that we need to really push this forward and get to the point of this, that we are not just in a housing crisis, we are in a housing disaster. And there are numerous factors coming into this. But because we are currently under the governmentship, shall we say, of the Conservatives, who are completely ideologues when it comes to solving problems, instead of getting to the root of the problem and, trying to solve the housing crisis with good practical solutions, instead they're going to fall back to their ideological ways, which according to them is regulations. And of course, apparently, again, to them, it's all these regulations that are in the way. So they intend to liberalise more planning laws. And of course, this is not going to work. There are bigger problems in the housing industry than this. One of the big ones that we see are housing companies who buy up speculative land and then don't build on them for about 15 to 20 years. There's an estate just down here from me that didn't actually start to build for about 4 years ago, and yet that land had been bought for that exact purposes 15 years ago. I was 7 when that land was initially bought. They didn't actually start building on it until I was about 28. So even then, there has been a significant time lag. And again, we've also got huge problems in that landlords go in and snap up properties and then rent them out. We know that is a big problem of landlords going in and buying up new properties to essentially rent out, which in itself causes even more problems and another shortage of housing. So there are solutions to this problem, but it's not found in liberalising planning laws. So let's go and dig deep into this as to why this policy that the Tories are suggesting is not going to work. But before we do that, please do remember to hit that like, share and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page, as well as a one-off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can also buy me a coffee. And thank you to all those people who do support the channel that way. So, on with the article. So this comes from The Guardian, and the title is, Liberalising Planning Rules to Fix a Housing Crisis Sounds Logical, but it won't work. If the price of food had increased at the same rate as housing prices in the UK over the past 50 years, then today a chicken would cost just under £70, as average house prices in London are more than twice as high as the rest of the country. And in the capital, that chicken would cost almost £140. The government response to our soaring inflation is to promise to build more homes at speed by loosening the planning system. It is a supply-side solution, which sounds logical. Rapid increase in the number of homes being built and prices would inevitably come down. And it is a highly contentious approach. Which cost the Conservatives and Cheshire and Amersham at the by-election. But this also sounds as if it should actually work. The problem is that the housing market does not function like a pure market, which again gets to the root of the Tories' ideological problem. Because again, the housing market, as was said there, it is not a pure market. And remember, the current Tories are being run by free market fundamentalists. So, of course, they're going after regulations, which, again, to their ideology, should be the solution to these problems. But, of course, it's not. And while the UK does not have some of the highest prices in the world at the moment, the affordability crisis is not a particularly British issue. It's a global problem. With an index by the property consultants, Knight and Frank revealed that the global residential prices have risen by more than 60% in the past 10 years. And cities around the world, from Auckland to Vancouver, are facing an affordability crisis, with huge price rises and extreme gentrification in cities linked to global capital flows and foreign investment rather than local circumstances. This ensures that increased supply will not bring prices down. The new luxury apartment complex that now characterise British cities such as London and Manchester, Bristol to York, to name but a few, remain out of reach for the majority of house buyers, and many are just sold off plan straight to foreign investors before they even have actually been built. And of course, the flood of global capital into cities, followed by the financial crisis, has been driven by low or negative interest rates and the growing dominance of global private equity in real estate and quantitative easing, and the policy of creating trillions of pounds of electronic money pursued by the Bank of England, the Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank. In the UK, 445 billion was created between 2019 and 2016, which went disproportionately into the hands of the richest, who then ploughed it straight into disproportionately directly into property. Between March and November of 2020, a further 450 billion was funneled into the economy, which have similarly been pumped into the housing market, creating a distorting effect. The irony is that while house prices have soared around the world, they are generally left out of central banks' calculations on inflation. In the UK, food, clothes, furniture and cars and holidays are all included in the government's preferred inflation index and the consumer price index, but house prices are not. The European Central Bank is looking at measuring the role of housing in rising costs of living in a forthcoming strategic policy review, but there is very little likelihood of the UK doing the same. This is the global context for our extreme housing crisis, which is further fueled by local circumstances. Chief among these are the private sector lacking incentives to produce more housing, and a social housing sector that builds very limited amounts of social housing and an affordable housing as well. Margaret Thatcher's defining policy of the right to buy, under which more than 2 million council houses were sold, continues to decimate the dwindling amount of affordable housing in England, although Scotland and Wales have halted the policy. In 1978, the year before Thatcher came to power, the government built 100,000 council homes. The private sector built 150,000. And there was no shortage of housing. But since then, the private sector house building figures have failed to make up the shortfall, despite repeated policy invectives to actually attract them, such as starter homes, which have continued to raise a very limited rise in the building and added to further inflationary pressures by increased mortgage credit. House builders and businesses are accountable to their shareholders, and it is well documented that it is not in their interest to flood the market with homes, as it would damage their profits. Again, the biggest problem that we face is that the profit motive, that it is not profitable for these housing companies to go out and build all these homes. So, as it would damage their profits. Instead, they control the rate of production and trickle our limited numbers of homes from the large developments to keep the prices high. And as a result, repeated government reviews and politicians from both parties have considered identifying the land banking rather than a restrictive planning system as a key barrier to supply-side solutions. There is also very little incentive to build high-quality, larger homes, leaving the UK with some of the smallest homes in Europe, with most attractive sites for developers in the city centres suited to small luxury apartment developments rather than generating a high income. If there is a widespread recognition that the planning system is not the main barrier, then why are government reforms so focused on loosening the restrictions? This is partly because it is a voter-friendly idea outside of the Tory shires and are popular with free market conservatives, which is again what we said. While the international interventionist policies required to generally affect housing prices and inflation are seen as ideologically unacceptable. But I tell you, Canada and New Zealand, which have witnessed some of the fastest house prices in the world, have introduced policies to dampen this from foreign investors. Canada has proposed a new tax on foreign investors and restrictions on mortgage credit, while New Zealand has introduced its Reserve Bank to consider housing prices in marketing monetary policy decisions. Solutions involving the public sector are equally hard to envisage, such as a public housing program or a large-scale building new large-scale housing developments, which enabled by the municipality purchase of land, which underpinned the creation of the post-war new towns and remains the European model for development. The chief obstacle, which is so widely acknowledged as in policy circles, is that there is really no desire for property prices to fall, as housing investment has had a direct bearing on GDP and economic growth and confidence in the economy. The paradox is, though, that millions of individuals and families under the age of 45 are being excluded from the housing market, but millions of older voters inclined to vote Conservative stand to gain from the ever-increasing asset increase. And the growing consensus is that the planning bill is very unlikely to survive in its current form, as is why it is so unpopular with swathes of Conservative MPs in vulnerable Shire constituencies. The result is that planning reforms are very unlikely to make a substantive difference in the first place and are likely to be significantly watered down. In this way, the government claiming to liberalise the planning system can appeal to its free market wing while also appealing to the non-development lobby in the shires. It may be very clever politics, which produces a lot of noise about the need to build, but it obscures the case of the causes of the housing crisis instead of actually addressing them. And again, this ain't going to happen under a Conservative government. They are not going to solve it at all. There is no inclination for them to actually go out and solve this crisis, because as we said at the beginning, private sector, there's no cause for them to go out and start building hundreds of thousands of new homes, because that leads to a decrease. The government is not intentionally going to actually get involved, because it goes against the free market fundamentalist policy of the government should not be involved in anything. And of course, we are stuck in the middle. And until public opinion actually starts to change and to push for actual solutions, as we've just gone through there, to solve that, and there are other countries that are doing this, like we've had the solutions offered there from Canada and New Zealand. So there are solutions to this problem, but we just actually have to now to get them in and push for them. And I think, again, actual policies that would solve this for Labour would be very hard to push, and I admit, as was said there, very hard to push for, but these are needed. And if you want to get a huge swing for those under 45 votes, maybe this is the way forward that Labour needs to look at. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share and subscribe button. And of course, down below there is a link to my Patreon page, as well as one off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can, buy me a coffee. And as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you all next time.